President Trump meets with Vladimir Putin and proposes a peace deal for Ukraine. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett registers a new political party in Israel. Are Prime Minister Netanyahu's days numbered? Chinese economy continues to struggle as Chinese ships collide with one another near the Philippines. You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. Mensch-Kight Geopolitics is your home for conservative commentary on international affairs with an eye toward Israel and the Middle East. I'm your host, Isaac Kight, your lovable lawnsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, and your prophet of things to come. Welcome back, Insiders. It's been entirely too long since I have joined you with another one of these podcasts. Over a month, by the light of reason. How did I let that happen? I'm about to explain, but it has been too long. So many things have happened, and it'll be a great opportunity to talk about them. Summer is a busy time for me, work-wise, big time in my industry, so it takes up a lot of my time. I've also been working on a book, and the closer I get to finishing a book, whether I publish 2 books of poetry, but the closer I get done to them, to being done with them, the more time I put in. I just get obsessed. I really want the thing to come out right. And a while back, I was making study guides for my boys. There's lots of information on the U.S. Constitution about the Constitution itself and the Bill of Rights. But when you're looking for information about the latter amendments, the 11 through 27, not a lot of information. Some stuff on Wikipedia, AI teaches you some things. And I thought, for homeschoolers, for those who are interested in learning, if you just had one source, if you just had a book you could read that had all of that information there. So as I was making study guides for my boys on each of the amendments, I went ahead and started putting them together into a larger work, and I've included amendments that were proposed or introduced but never ratified, those that were proposed at different times. There's a lot of great American history there, major Supreme Court cases, various proposals, Roe v. Wade, all kinds of stuff. So I managed to get a lot of good stuff in there. I'm trying to wrap it up. It's got a little bit more to go, but I'm having fun with it, and I want to get it to a state where it's more or less finished, so I can go back through, polish, fitting, the spinning wheels, all the I's and T's and the spit and the shine, and have it ready for publishing. I'm almost certainly going to self-publish and just put it out there and let people get the e-version of it, or you'll be able to buy a book version of it, and it'll just be there. And it's a great time for history, opportunity to look at the major court cases, and just talk about some of the major constitutional issues like presidential elections. What's the history of talking about direct election or changes to the Electoral College? What are some of the alternatives? That kind of stuff. Lots of great Supreme Court cases out there where if you just know a little bit about them, like, oh, hey, this, as a result of this case, an amendment was written to override it, or, stuff like that. So good stuff, but it's got me really wrapped up, and I'm putting a lot more time to that. I got to get back to the show, though. I've been away from you guys entirely too long. So let's dive back in. I've got some good stuff for you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about domestic politics briefly, and then I'm going to dive into Israeli politics. Israeli politics has been interesting again. With the war and all of that, it's been very intense, and a lot of political stuff has been put on the back burner. I've talked a little bit about that throughout the present conflict, going back to 2023, back when the show was Inside Israel News, before it became Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. But I'm still very Israel-centered here, and I want to get you guys updated. Interesting stuff happening now that pertains to the upcoming 2026 election. And then I've got, some stuff to talk about, Trump's Ukraine proposal, stuff going on in China. There's lots of good stuff. So let's go and dive into that. In terms of domestic politics, I just have to comment on this redistricting thing. This is great. So I lived in California for a lot of years, and I'll admit, California's had some problems. Back in the 80s, they redrew the districts, and in 1982, the Republicans lost a bunch of seats in California. California's had this history of redistricting problems. And then in 2021, in 2001, they redrew the districts so that basically the Republicans and the Democrats would keep the same numbers in the state legislature. And that ended up backfiring because the Republicans ended up gaining a seat in the Senate. So that was interesting. Didn't make a big difference, obviously. California's very left and always has been. But you look at the situations so you look at states like Illinois, and there have been great maps going around X and all over social media. These gerrymandered districts. The term gerrymander comes from Elbridge Gerry, who was elected in Boston, and they created a district for him that was this big salamander-looking thing, and it was called the gerrymander. Right. So this is not something new in American history. That goes way back to our founding. So we have gerrymandering. But you look at some of these blue states and their districts that they cut over here and they cut a little over here and over there. You look at Chicago and it's like, oh, we got a little blue district. And it just kind of winds and wends its way around this way, big crescent. We'll take a little chunk of this and a little chunk of that to make sure they get precisely the result that they want. Blue states are very gerrymandered. No, does that mean red states have never gerrymandered or whatever? No, as Texas and Florida have gotten new seats as a result of their increasing population, yeah, they've made them generally red seats. But at the same time, it's not difficult to get red seats in Florida or Texas, is it? Lots of Republicans there. With the Congress this tight, right, we've got Norman Nutters like Thomas Massey holding up legislation. We've got Nancy Nutters like Marjorie Taylor Greene holding up legislation. The Democrats are just, they're rabid. They're frothing at the mouth, foaming at the mouth. They're diseased. they want blood. If the Democrats get the majority in the House, it's just going to shut down Congress. They're going to impeach the president, even though they know the Republicans will control the Senate. It's going to be a mess. So if the GOP could just gain 5 or 6 seats, get a little bit more comfortable majority, we could get bills through and things would be more comfortable. Can't let the Democrats get the majority or it's just going to shut down the whole government. So Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Missouri, South Carolina, a couple of other states, Indiana, looking at redistricting so they can get one more seat in most of those cases and a couple more seats in Florida, 2 or 3, and maybe as many as 5 in Texas. And Texas is redrawing their districts. One of the people who'll be going will be Jasmine Crockett, one of the squad members. We won't miss her. There's lots of great memes going around from the Batman or the Spider-Man memes. Hey, if you redistrict, then Jasmine Crockett's going to lose her seat. I already support it. You don't have to sell me. It's like, it's just great news. And of course, in response, a couple of blue states, Illinois and California, a couple others have threatened to gerrymander their states even more. All right. So I just real quick want to cover. Okay. So blue states have been heavily gerrymandered. In California, they did this thing where we're going to have an independent commission to redraw the states. They created this independent commission, and almost all of the members were graduates of UC. Like the people appointed to the commission were not representative of Californians. They picked a very narrow section of people, and they redrew the districts, and Republicans have been losing seats in the state legislature and in Congress ever since. Now, on top of that, these blue states being gerrymandered, they also let illegals vote. No voter ID required. So with all the illegal votes and the gerrymandering and the ballot harvesting and Republicans are losing seats in these blue states. The Republicans lost at least 6 seats in the last election they shouldn't have, right? And it's fairly obvious what happened there. And of course, a lot of these were, 2 weeks after the election, suddenly magically a congressman who'd won on election night, won re-election, isn't winning anymore. Come on, people, we're not stupid. It doesn't take 2 weeks to count the votes. It takes 2 weeks to rig an election. Anyway. So there's this kind of nonsense. So don't play these games with us, okay? But one of the problems we have on the GOP side is we do believe in fairness. We do believe in the system. Like, we want justice. Like, we don't want the FBI to go after Democrats. We want the FBI to go after criminals, whoever they are, right? We want fairness. But because Republicans don't persecute Democrats, use the law, we don't engage in lawfare, because we don't gerrymander, well, a little here and there, but we don't really gerrymander like we could gerrymander, because we don't cheat like they do, we end up losing. And the fastest way to end this cheating is to cheat like them. Matt Rinaldi, former chairman of the Texas GOP, gave a great speech one night. He followed me speaking before what is now American Jewish Conservatives. Great group there, Gershon and everyone. Shout out. Great group. Anyway, we were there, and he talked about, look, if we want to beat the Dems, we have to be better at their own games. So in California, in Illinois, in New York, we should be taking full advantage of these rules. If they can ballot harvest, let's ballot harvest at churches and senior homes. Let's go to places where Republicans are, and let's do this. The more we do, the less the cheating benefits them, and then it kind of changes from there. So let's do it. I say, let's do it. Let's force this to the fore. We need we need a law from Congress requiring voter IDs, something, grant program to the states, something. Get them to adopt this. We got to stop this nonsense. But if we do this, I think it'll draw attention to it. When you look at the map for, redistricting in 2031 for the reapportionment of seats, the Democrats cheated last time in 2021 and reapportioned using illegals as residents, counting. That way they deliberately underreported red states and overreported blue states to keep them from losing seats. So come 2031, they're likely to lose a whole bunch of seats. So Illinois, New York, and California stand to lose a bunch of seats. California could lose as many as 5. So, Gavin Newsom says he wants to go out and get 5 seats for the Democrats. Well, first of all, that could blow up in his face. He'd have to get a ballot measure passed at a special election, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's already come out against it, and polls show that California voters aren't all that interested. When it comes to statewide ballot measures, you got to be careful. Californians are good at sniffing out power grabs and stupid stuff. Sometimes. Maybe I have too much faith in Californians, but there were a bunch of things that were on the ballot that were stupid, and we managed to shoot them down by just injecting a little common sense, But anyway, so that's that. But they'll have to go to a special election, and then they'll redraw the districts. And I've looked at their district map. If just a small group of people shift right and get ticked off by this, the Republicans could not only keep their 5 seats, they could even gain a seat on the West Coast, which would be interesting. A Republican congressional seat that touches water. Those are rare. Democrats are people who own boats, right? Anyway, so that's all sorts of fun. I just think it's going to blow up in their faces. Just me, whatever. Okay. We get the tariffs and the trade deals. I just want to comment on that briefly. Brilliant stuff Trump is doing. You deal with the EU. They're going to invest over $1 trillion in the U.S. 15% reciprocal tariff. Great stuff. Okay, we're lowering trade barriers, getting our stuff into those markets, Japan, that kind of stuff, and then they're putting money over here, right? So they're going to invest money here. The tariff revenue, and this is kind of interesting. Tariffs are going to cause inflation. It's another tax. As Scott Bessent has noted, for the most part, prices aren't changing. Why? Companies are having to eat this margin, right? This is one of the things, prices are prices, okay? If a Toyota costs $50,000 and there's a comparable Chevy that's $40,000, you might spend an extra $10,000 to get what you think is a higher quality and a better brand. Oh, I'm going to have a Toyota, it's a better car, okay? You might think that, okay? But if that Toyota jumps up to $55,000, if it jumps up to $57,000, I mean, if the price goes up that high, you start looking at it, that Chevy's looking a lot better. Maybe I just drive my Chevy instead of, and so you can't sell cars. You can't just bump the prices up on cars. So in order to sell cars, they have to keep the prices competitive. And that's a funny thing. If I have a shop in town that runs oil changes, right, and I charge $50 for oil changes, and everybody else in town charges $40 for oil changes, I'm not going to do a lot of oil changes, okay? If you have a price for something, this is what the market will bear. There may be some slight increases here and there, but now that egg prices and gas prices have come down, generally speaking, consumer prices are falling or becoming more reasonable, less shrinkflation and that kind of thing. Anyway, the point is, as Scott Bessent has noted, for the most part, prices aren't changing. And that, my friends, is good news. And of course, with all the investment here, we'll have lots of jobs and growth for our own people, and more stuff will be made here. Now, there's all this stuff, well, do you really think we're going to make more towels and children's toys here? Probably not. It is really cheaper to make that stuff in India or in Vietnam. Okay, Pakistan. I get it. But at the same time, there are comparable American products in a lot of areas that will become more competitive. The main thing is the investment back in our economy, right? That drives growth here. We'll be producing more. And there's national security elements to that. As Alexander Hamilton noted, when we became independent, we relied on the French for a lot of our gunpowder and for a lot of our guns. We have to be able to forge cannons. We have to be able to build warships, which back then were, wooden frigates, which we immediately, in shortly after the U.S. was founded, started building our first 6 frigates. We have to be able to manufacture it. So if we don't make enough steel in the United States, then China and other countries can hold us hostage to steel. We have to be able to make steel in order to make tanks and in order to build ships, right? So you have to think about that. Pharmaceuticals, like if all our medicine is made in China, what happens when we have a pandemic here and China's keeping all the medicines? Well, we've seen. So there's a lot of good stuff in this, and I'm excited. It's all headed in the right general direction. Okay, it's a little slower than it might have been, and it's taking a little bit more time to come up with these deals, but I think we can generally be optimistic. Everything's kind of headed in the right direction, and the economy is slowly growing, and wages are growing faster than inflation. What a wonderful thing. For working people, these are huge wins for us, and it's only going to get better. Now, is it going to get better everywhere? No, California still has the highest unemployment rate in the country. But I'm telling you, if you go to Texas, it's booming, and not just, jobs. I mean, there's all kinds of entertainment, fun, cigar lounges. I mean, we're just having a great time. People have money for leisure and luxuries. So, my friends, it's a good time to be a working landsman, a working schmo like me, and, doing our jobs. Those of us, and I only occasionally put on an orange hard hat, but for those of us who wear orange hard hats or vests, for any period of time during our work, who actually have to do something in order to work and not just sit behind a computer. Although I find myself sitting behind a computer more and more these days. This is the problem. You get good at something and they keep promoting you, and next thing you know, you're driving a desk. And it's like, oh, come on. Ah, writing reports and this kind of stuff. It makes more money and it's good. But, it's like, I want to be out there. I want to be seeing stuff and doing stuff. So that's how things work. But, I know. I should be a doctor or a lawyer or a banker. He's got an MBA. He's kind of a smart guy. What's he doing? But, Isaac and his family, they like to work. And I was like, okay. So anyway, that's why I'm your lovable lawnsman. As for, the economy, we have, record imports coming through our West Coast ports. Couple of reasons behind that. First of all, everyone was saying, "Oh God, the Seattle's desolate. We're not getting any shipping through." I just love, Sal Macagliano on What's Up with Shipping or What the Ship. He's got some great shows up there. He makes some good stuff, and he's absolutely the brightest on this stuff. And he keeps talking about, no, this stuff isn't true, and if you actually look at it, there's this, there's that. But we have record shipping coming through for 2 sort of short-term reasons. One being that taking cargo around Africa to East Coast ports is more dangerous. It's a long trip. It's dangerous to go through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and risk being attacked by the Houthis. So you have to go around Africa. Now that's taking longer. Panama Canal, even with the new canal zone, the new lane, takes a lot of time to go through there, costs money. So, if you're shipping something from China, you don't want to, ship it all the way through Panama and then go up to Louisiana or South Carolina or Florida to unload it. That's a long trip. In any case, there's a little bit of that. So you see the East Coast ports are down a little bit at the West Coast. There's also a rush to get a lot of stuff moved before tariffs kick in a lot of places. But in the general sense of things, there's a little up and down here, but generally speaking, the imports have been steady. So we're getting imports. I mean, again, the naysayers, the doomsayers, the world is coming to an end. It's like, oh, come on, people. I mean, I'm telling you, I order a lot of stuff from, for my daughter especially, from K-pop fandom, which is a lot of it comes from China, unfortunately, but, from Korea, from Japan, and that kind of stuff. And it's like, it takes a couple weeks to get here, but it comes. And the price of it is still what it is. Sometimes it's outrageous. You're just sitting here like, anyway. So there you go. All right. With that, let's jump over to Israeli politics. And unfortunately, I don't have an episode of Eamon's Minute for you, but I will get one soon. Eamon's really excited to tell you more about the exciting adventures of Hannibal and his battles against Rome. It's kind of a favorite period of history for us, is that era there. Anyhow, Carthago delenda est. But we'll continue that anon. Anyhow, cut out to the break and, like I said, talk some more about international politics. You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics with Isaac Kite. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. Now you're messing with the son of a mensch. First up on our international news, this is just awesome. So many levels. So the U.S. brokered a plan with Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah. This is something we've been talking about for eons. Condoleezza Rice, who was interestingly recently on the Goodfellows podcast with her Goodfellows. She runs the Hoover Institute over there at Stanford, and she does a lot of great work. But she's interesting, and hearing her opinions. Right about some things, not everything. But, we can't all be right about everything, in my humble opinion. Great things. I highly recommend. Go check that out. It's on YouTube. It's also available where you find podcasts. And I'm always listening to that and The Verdict and several other podcasts that I love and enjoy. And those are good things. Anyhow, so Condi helped when she was Secretary of State back in 2006, after the conflict ended between Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas with Israel. The big, rockets being fired and all this kind of nonsense. She brokered a deal to get a UN force in there, and the idea was that they were going to disarm Hezbollah. And that threat hung over them for a while, and unfortunately, it was never followed up. No surprise, the UN's not going to do anything. And the largely French and Italian forces that were there didn't do anything anyway. And then they just accuse, when Israel goes in to fight Hezbollah after October 7th, then they just accuse Israel of attacking, UN posts and this kind of nonsense. When, there are guys, Hezbollah guys popping up out of tunnels, literally right outside of UN posts. And it's like they can't not know that tunnel was there, Anyway, so now we are finally coming around to dealing with Hezbollah. And if the Lebanese government will actually just go ahead and disarm, my friends, having these terrorist proxy groups in your country is not a good thing. Lebanon is a failed state. Like, their economy is in shambles. They've never recovered from the 2006 war, where Israel had to destroy a significant amount of their infrastructure, bridges, roads, and such, in order to defeat Hezbollah. 20 years later, Lebanon is still a mess, right? They haven't been able to get anything done. Ultimately, Hezbollah ended up having a veto in their government. It was the best the Arabs could negotiate to try to make the place civilized. The French cut Lebanon out of Syria after Sykes-Picot in an attempt to create a majority Christian country on the coast of the Mediterranean there, and they accomplished that. Lebanon used to have 51% Christian majority, but with all the civil wars started by the Palestinians, wonderful people that. Now, Lebanon is, something like 36% Christian. And the Sunni minority is growing as a percentage of the population. They live mostly in the north. They're not too happy with the Shiite militias either, controlling their country. And obviously, Shiite militias like Hezbollah, Amal, and others, because there's always, the Chimera also has other heads. There's always more heads. There are always more groups and more things. Anyway, it's a big problem there. Anyway, so now we finally have a plan since Hezbollah got pagered and their leadership is gone and they've been weakened and they're no longer getting weapons through Syria because the government of Syria, if you hadn't noticed, is not very fond of Hezbollah or Iran. So Hezbollah is in deep doo-doo. They're in some trouble there. And now the U.S. government is working with Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah once and for all. Every bit of that is good. Israel can disarm them by blowing this up and blowing that up, bombing this and bombing that. But if they actually go in there and arrest these people, then of course, and capture the weapons, take their money and this kind of thing, and actually disarm Hezbollah, at least try, then the organization weakens even further. And there's an opportunity for Lebanon to be rebuilt and become a country again. Lebanon, Beirut was the Paris of the Middle East. All the Saudi princes never had their vacation homes there. The Arabic spoken in Lebanon is the lingua franca. It is the beautiful Arabic, everyone says, and this kind of thing. It used to be a really nice place and fairly modern. You know what I mean? And as the Middle East's reputation, if you're, provincial thinking, let's just say, this was a great place. It really was a center for Arab thought and intellectualism and books and intelligence and this kind of thing. And now it's a war zone and has been for 40 years. So let's see Lebanon improve. Oh God, it's been almost 50 years. Oh, my friends, I feel old. I remember reading about this stuff when I was younger, and the conflict was already 20 years old when I was a teenager. So it's been, time. It goes by, doesn't it? Anyway, so this is a really good idea. Let's go forward with this plan. Israel will help in what way they can. Over the border in Syria, real quick, the massacre of the Druze in Suwaida, I have to say, the images coming out of there remind me so much of October 7th. It's horrifying. They're torturing Christians, torturing Druze in Syria. This has to stop. The only people trying to stop it are Israel. And, the woke right, Tucker Carlson, he wants to talk about, oh God, it's so horrible being a Christian living in Israel. Christians in Israel are happy people. The population of Christians in Israel has grown. You know what the population of Christians what's happened to that population in the Middle East? They're almost non-existent. Countries that had large Christian minorities are now almost devoid of Christians altogether. The persecution of Christians in the Middle East has been awful. They're being murdered. They're being tortured. And, Tucker Carlson's on there, with minor complaints about, oh, no. Israel is the only country in the Middle East right now where it is safe to be a Christian. I know, I was there. I would ride the bus. I'd see people wearing crosses here and there, not just tourists, but people who live there. And I would chat them up to the extent that most of them spoke English. And, they'd tell me all kinds of good things. You want to hear about the Middle East? You talk to an Arab Christian, a real Arab Christian. Talk to a Maronite. Talk to an Orthodox Christian. Right? There's a significant portion of Christians in the Middle East are Orthodox. Right? Talk to these groups. Talk to a Copt, the Coptic Church. There's this great story. This reverend from England, he's going around Egypt and he's talking to people about Christianity and trying to proselytize a little bit. And the people in this little town were kind of looking at him funny, and he kept trying. And he's like, "What?" Finally, he took someone aside. What's going on here? Why aren't you guys interested in Christianity? And the guy's like, "Interested in Christianity? We're Copts. We're all Christians already. We were converted to Christianity by John the Baptist." And this guy was like, "What?" He had no concept. There are ancient movements of Christianity in the Middle East still, and they're just being persecuted and abused, and they're having to leave. There's no surprise to me. My congregation back in California were Egyptian exiles. Jews who had to leave Egypt because they couldn't live there anymore. They lost everything. People who were well-to-do families lost everything. Good friend of mine, that Joseph Abdul Wahid, he, was from a pretty well-to-do family. He went to leave. He had a suit on. They took his bag, took everything he had, and his money and everything. He had the suit on his back. They thankfully let him have that, and they wanted to take his watch too. And he told them, look, this was a gift from my father. And the customs guy looks at him, thinks about it for a minute, just to remind him that it's in his power to make the decision. And then he says, magnanimously, yeah, you can keep the watch. So, he came from a pretty prosperous family with real estate and businesses and what have you in Egypt, and he left the country with a watch and a suit on his back. And then a lot of these guys had to go to France and wait for visas to Mexico or the US to get out of there. And while in France, they were being helped, receiving charity, but they're living in these tiny little apartments in the bad parts of town, barely getting by, some of them with children. My friends, this is ridiculous. Anyway, the persecution of Christians and minorities in Syria has to stop. This is ridiculous. Israel is the only one trying to stop it. And people shouldn't be parading around with this guy, al-Shara, who's, clearly a terrorist still, and his people going around murdering Christians and Druze and minorities in their country. This is unacceptable. And we need to make sure that that is clear, that this is not acceptable. So Sueda and southern Syria need to become a zone ruled by the Druze. And Israel's been helping to accomplish that and arming the Druze to defend themselves. And those Druze and Christians are out protesting. And what are they doing? They're flying Israeli flags. But the woke right doesn't want to hear that. The media doesn't want to hear that. Christians being killed in Nigeria, Christians being killed in Syria, that's all dog bites man, right? No Jews, no news. But if, somebody posted, Jews are spitting on Christians. So my God, people, my friends, it's horrifying. There are Jews who are badly behaved. I'm ashamed to tell you that as a Jew, we are people. We are human beings, and some of us are nice people, and some of us are not nice people. That's a funny thing, I think that also applies to Christians, too. Some Christians are good people and nice people, and some are not. I mean, it happens to people. Funny thing. So some people are a little bit misbehaved, but what they don't tell you is, there are people that stand out on the corners in Israel with a bullhorn on Shabbat, which is our day of rest. And, they're shouting, proselytizing at people. And occasionally they get spat at, and occasionally people push them a little bit. And occasionally the police come and shut them down because that's not allowed. Like, Jews are allowed to have quiet enjoyment of our traditions and our beliefs in our own country. What a funny thing. Now I'm telling you, my friends, while you guys are having a Christian Christmas party at your church, a mega church down in Dallas, I'm not going to be in the parking lot with a bullhorn shouting about the finer points of Baruch Spinoza's philosophy, while you guys are trying to have a nice little party and give presents to the kids. Okay. You guys go have your party. That's cool. You do your thing. I'll do my thing. That's America. It's beautiful. Okay. So this is the persecution is it's a terrible thing, and I'm really tired of the attempt to demonize Israel. Qatar Olson and other woke rights people are desperately trying to divide Christians from Jews, because if Qatar and other countries can convince people here not to support Jews and not to support Israel, then they can they can do more October 7th. They can cause more harm. Right. And that's utterly despicable. Thankfully, it's not working. The truth is, Qatar Olson and other traitors, other woke right people are not being listened to. They don't have the following that they purport to have. Like I told you, they're using bots to pump up their numbers and this kind of thing. For the most part, they're making a lot of noise and nobody's listening. Right. And I don't know if there's anything to listen to. You go to if you do listen to Tucker, and I can't, so I don't. But people who are listening are telling me it's increasingly, America bad, America's allies bad, Russia good, Iran good, right, Qatar good, and America bad. Well, that's not America first, my friends. So anyway, moving on. So there's been this back and forth over the plans for Gaza. A couple of thoughts on that. So first of all, Trump has used the shock therapy approach to negotiations many times. So America will take over Gaza, and we'll just move half the people out of there. and we'll turn it into a resort, something like that, right? You throw those ideas out there, and all of a sudden people are like, oh my God, no, oh. And, it encourages other people to come up with different ideas. So Bibi came forward and said, hey, we're going to take over Gaza. We have to run it. What he said was reality. The only way to destroy Hamas, the only way to make sure that food is distributed to the Palestinian people and not stolen by Hamas, and there's all kinds of videos out there of them taking the food and whatever, the only way to accomplish all of that is for Israel to take direct control. Okay? That's what they're doing. Now, they are also working with militias that are not affiliated with Hamas, and those militias are distributing food and that kind of thing. But in Gaza City, for the most part, people are being tortured by Hamas. There are videos out there of Hamas beating people, hanging people up, shooting people in the streets. They want to retain power, and that can't be allowed. So Hamas has to be destroyed. And the only way to do that at this point is for Israel to go in. Now, it would be beautiful if someone had an alternative. So we get, Qatar and other countries, they complain, oh, no, you can't do that. Well, then offer us a different way forward, right? Why don't you send your security forces there and build something different? Ryan Macbeth is talking about, Tahrir Force or Tahrir Militia. I love that because that's what I was calling it originally was, Tahrir Force. It's funny because it's a difference of nomenclature that really doesn't make a difference. But, my thought was basically, Jaish Tahrir, right? Army of Tahrir or whatever, refers to the Tahrir protests, the Tahrir Square in Cairo. A lot of people in Gaza look up to that, and they've had movements referencing Tahrir before as a reference to liberating themselves from Hamas. Originally, Ryan Macbeth was talking about Sons of Palestine because there was Sons of Iraq, where they paid Iraqis to behave themselves and be kind of a police force or military force to control and govern Iraq. And he was just saying that to draw the reference. But Tahrir militia. I mean, militia in English is it's the same word in Arabic. They transliterate militia, right, into Arabic. So Jaish, militia, whatever works for you. Jaish means army, but it has other connotations. A little bit more toughness, a little bit more religious thinking, connotation in there. So the point is, whatever you want to call it, some kind of force has to be developed there to govern that area and keep Hamas out and terrorist groups like Islamic Jihad and others under thumb. Well, if you don't want Israel to control it, then pitch an alternative. Until then, there's no choice. We have to go in and control it. And then everybody's, it's all about the land. This is a temporary situation. Israel doesn't want the land. We moved all of our people out of there. That's how much we don't want the land. We even moved the dead. The cemeteries were dug up and people were reburied in Israel. We left nothing behind. We took all of our stuff. The only thing that we left behind were the synagogues because those couldn't be demolished. And when we left, the Arabs who could have turned those synagogues into libraries or built anything with them went and torched them and burned them down. Yeah, that's Hamas for you. Anyway, so again, if you have a different alternative, pitch it. Listener Steven, you know who you are. We had a conversation about this, and he had a brilliant idea. And, he was saying, why don't we talk about, the U.S. and other international, EU? We've got lots of money, and if Qatar and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and other countries would send their security forces there to help train these people and get a new group together, there'd be a fair compromise there. Israel wouldn't be in control. There'd be something new to govern the area, and they wouldn't even have to pay for it necessarily. We have international institutions to help with that. You have to get the UN out, of course. Just a sidebar here. There's a lot more public support for getting rid of UNRWA out there than people think. The Palestinians are the only group of people in the world who have their own aid agency from the UN. Right, like World Health Organization, the only health organization for the whole world. Right, there's United Nations has refugee, but children, UNICEF. Right? That's UNICEF for all children all over the world, except for the Palestinians who have their own group. So anyway, pitch a different idea, come up with something, and listener Steven's right. I mean, this is, come on, come up with something. All right. There was a deal on the table that Hamas almost took. Right? There were talks going on. Hamas kept coming back with stupid stuff, and it kept getting shut down. And finally, they were coming close to a deal where Hamas leadership would leave, Hamas would be shut down, and the hostages would be released. We were very close to that deal. And as Secretary of State Marco Rubio has noted, then Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, opened his mouth and talked about how France was going to recognize a Palestinian state. And the British and the Australians and others have said that they might do so as well if there isn't a ceasefire. And immediately Hamas walked away from the negotiations. So President Macron sabotaged a peace deal. There's now a lot of blood on his hands. That idiot, that's as polite as I can be, is causing a lot more death. And of course, he won't get any of the blame. Thankfully, Secretary of State Rubio did go public with that. And too many of these diplomatic faux pas and this stupid stuff remains quiet. Nobody ever hears about it. But, we need to hear, we need to know who was responsible. So that was utterly stupid. France is going to have new elections. There's a very good chance that Marine Le Pen is going to be the next president, or possibly Bardella. I will talk about that in the future. I don't have a lot of time to talk about European politics right now, but we will cover that. And as I've told you, the next election is likely to be an election between the far right and the far left, like a crazy far right and crazy far left. Thank you, France. We appreciate that. Anyway, the far right in France, of course, has not been as crazy, just picking on them. But we'll see what happens. Oy. So, listener John from Australia, welcome. And I know that, there was the stupid ads, Foster's, Australian for bear. It's not true, but you're living on a continent where everything's trying to kill you, from the spiders to the kangaroos, and I'm grateful that you're listening as well. So I guess what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Glad to hear you listening. Sorry about your government being stupid, trying to recognize a Palestinian state. But hey, we've had bad governments here too. So unfortunately, I actually lost access to several of my email accounts, and thank you, Google. I didn't even know about it, so I haven't been receiving my news email from Inside Israel News. I haven't been receiving my Mensch-Kight email. So, InsideIsraelNews@gmail.com. If you were sending stuff to that for almost a month, I didn't have access, and I couldn't figure out why. And finally, I got a notification that I needed to log back in. So I logged back in and I got my listener, and a bunch of you guys, so I'm trying to catch up on those emails. A bunch of you guys have been emailing in and asking questions and telling me different things you want to hear, and I'm trying to get there. So part of what I'm doing today, covering different things, are some of the issues that you guys brought up. And John wants to hear more about the lawfare and politics going on with Bibi, and he's right. It's stuff I need to cover, and we have some issues coming up that allow me to cover that. So real quick here, as I've told you before, there are several cases pending against Bibi Netanyahu implying corruption. And the biggest one, of course, is the submarine case where, they bought submarines from Germany and there were purportedly kickbacks. And Bibi at least knew about it. There's some who say Bibi got kickbacks himself. Some of the other cases are more circumstantial. They're saying that Bezik got a big deal, and the employee that they had as their main witness was somebody who's staunchly anti-Bibi. Not a very credible case. So there's been some of that. However, Bibi did consider a plea deal at one point. And so it's one of those things, Bibi's opponents say, we've got him red-handed. And Bibi himself says, I'm squeaky clean. I haven't done anything wrong. And yet they've discussed a plea deal. You don't discuss a plea deal when you have a smoking gun, when you know you've got someone you can nail to the wall, right? At the same time, if you're, squeaky clean, you also don't discuss a plea deal. So we know there's some substance here to some of these, at least from a legal point of view. I'm not saying Bibi has necessarily done anything wrong or not done anything wrong. I'm going to withhold judgment on that. He has created the perception, he's allowed the perception to exist that he may have. And that's a big problem. So in Israel's court system, usually people are convicted and they have some kind of punishment. It's an unfortunate reality, but basically you're innocent until proven guilty in the Israeli courts. But what they do is they generally lower your charges or give you a slap on the wrist punishment, but you get some kind of punishment. And it's a terrible way to do justice. Unfortunately, it is their way. And, this is one of those things that needs to be fixed, in my opinion. The court system in Israel needs vast reforms, and one of the reforms needs to be that attitude. At the same time, it could be argued that, if you have a brush with the law and you get some kind of punishment, you're much less likely to commit crimes. This is what we call broken window theory. If kids are allowed to break windows, then they go steal, radios from cars, and the next thing you know, they're stealing cars, and then, they kill people. This kind of thing, the ever escalating criminality. Well, anyway, there's something to be said for that, I suppose. But I really do like the notion that, if I haven't done anything really wrong, then I shouldn't be punished. Anyway, the punishment, of course, would, if Bibi were out of office, he would not be immune to prosecution in any way, shape, or form. But the punishment, of course, is being barred from holding office, much like Ehud Olmert faced after his corruption trials when he left office as prime minister following his scandal. Anyway, so the main thing is these are aimed at getting Bibi out of office. Now, in 2019, when Bibi went to run for re-election, he really should have had some kind of succession plan. He's been prime minister forever. He can't hold on to the office forever. He should have had some kind of plan where maybe he becomes foreign minister or something like that, have a successor picked out, and retire, right? By 2023, 2024, it's time for Bibi to retire. Now, the 2019 election, there would have been an election in 2023. And if he'd had some kind of plan to retire by then, he'd probably have won re-election. But instead, Israel had 5 elections in 2 years because Bibi kept not losing entirely, but not winning entirely. And his opponents kept not winning entirely and not losing entirely. And they'd have these stalemate elections, what in Britain is called a hung parliament. So, they couldn't come up with a governing coalition, right? It's a multi-party proportional system. People vote for political parties nationally, right? There are no districts, nothing like that. So, they have to form coalitions from political parties. It's really a dysfunctional system, unfortunately. I'm a fan of majoritarian systems like those of Britain, the United States, Australia, where you have regional districts. You have a geographic constituency, and it chooses one representative. That's what we call majoritarian because generally you have 2 or 3 parties that dominate, and you get a majority more often. Anyway, here and there. But I do have to keep reminding you about the political system there. I also have to remind you that polls are unreliable in Israel. I'll be talking about polls here in a minute. So Bibi's had all this trouble, and with October 7th, they were trying to get a commission together to investigate. They wanted a more independent commission. Bibi shot that down, and there were a bunch of people saying, "Oh, he's just trying to avoid responsibility." He was trying to amend the Basic Law, which is basically the Constitution, to reform the judiciary, and then the judiciary struck it down, thus proving that the judiciary has been engaged in overreach. Even Benny Gantz had to admit, it's like, look, if you changed the Basic Law. I mean, Israel's system of government is a sovereign parliament. That means that whatever the Knesset passes is law. There is no basis for striking down a law enacted by parliament, but the courts found a way to do that. So the courts are out of control in Israel in general, and they know they have to rein it in. They just didn't like the proposals on the table that were made by Elion Levy because they were very partisan and one way. I've told you I don't like independent commissions picking judges. I don't like political appointments either. I mean, there has to be something in between, perhaps. But, bar associations are not impartial. They're not objective. And having the bar association as part of these appointment committees is not a good thing. Not saying politicians are great having them there either. But, the flexibility of the American system has shown that it generally works. I haven't liked every SCOTUS nominee, but generally speaking, they've been fairly qualified people, right? Not perfect. I've just finished writing about the battle over Roe v. Wade, and from 1973 to to the 2022 case, the Dobbs case. It's like 50 years of Supreme Court history, right? I went over and which appointments and how they were dealt with, and you know, being borked and this kind of thing. Anyway, so I just covered that. So that's why I'm talking about it. Okay, but the Israeli judiciary is out of control. Okay. So Bibi's still facing lawfare. He still has court, trials going on. If he left office as prime minister, they'd nail him to the wall. He'd probably end up going to jail, just because the Israeli justice system works that way. You get punished for something. The term of the jail would depend. He's been so defiant now that the judges are really going to, nail him to the wall. So my thinking would be, if I were the opposition, if you gave him immunity, if the Knesset passed a law giving him a pardon for all of those crimes in exchange for his stepping down, I think that would be a reasonable deal. Then he could go into respectable retirement, and this would all go away. But the opponents of Bibi don't want that. And so they are literally destroying the Israeli political system because of this. And it's both sides. And I'm not saying it's all Bibi's opponents, but Bibi himself has clung to power. That's been good in some ways because, of course, he's a well-known leader and he's got a good relationship with Trump, and he's led through this crisis reasonably. Lots of people in Israel, the people who hate Bibi in Israel, are already against him. He has lost some support, some people who don't like the way he's done things. Generally speaking, though, the favorability and unfavorability is about the same. People who support Bibi support Bibi. People who don't support Bibi don't support Bibi. Not much has changed. A little bit of ground has been lost here or there, but again, polls are unreliable. So, talking about the polls, Israel had elections back in 2022 that led to Bibi's government. And the way Bibi came to office is he got some very far right parties together, and they got just enough seats in the Knesset that he was able to perform a government with them. His main party, the Likud, which is the center right party, and the Orthodox religious parties, and these parties but that means there are people, radical right people in the government that most Israelis find extreme. Very extreme. And we're not, trying to make a U.S. comparison. I mean, it's difficult because these kinds of people just don't end up in government here. But, if you had wholly unqualified far-right people taking office, it's just, anyway. At the same time, Israelis have become a little bit more jaded. Some of these more right-wing parties like Otzma Yehudit, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, have gained popularity. Like his party, would have gained something like 2 seats in parliament. You have to clear a threshold higher than that. But, he was down in that range at one time. Well, now he may be earning 8, 9, 10 seats because a lot of people are they're ticked. I mean, a lot of people on the far right in Israel, see him as a good leader and see the far right as representing their interests, right? And the religious right represents their interests. And it's not like the religious right here. The ultra-Orthodox in Israel, they want a whole bunch of social programs so that they don't have to work. They study in schools all day and study Talmud. And I've talked about that before. I don't approve of that kind of behavior. Rashi was a shoemaker, one of our great scholars, the Rambam, Maimonides. He was a doctor. I mean, you should have a profession, you should feed your family, and you should study religious texts when you have time. And I have studied them on the side, and I know there's a lot to study in a lifetime. There can only be so many rabbis. Like, you can only have so many students studying religion all the time. But Hashem intended us to be working, doing different things. Anyway, 6 days you do your work, right? Some people can work, providing religious guidance to other people, but most people have to work. Right, so the election was held in 2022. The basic law says that the Knesset cannot sit for more than 4 years. So there has to be an election by the end of 2026, right? So about a year and a half out. There's a maximum of 4 years to a term. As I have said before, as long as the conflict is ongoing, there will not be an election until it's due, right? There has to be an election at the end of 2026, war or otherwise. But the idea that there could be an early election, there have been all these people talking about, Bibi's popularity is down and if he'd lose an election today, but there's not going to be an election, right? There's a war on. and Israelis are very focused on winning the war, right? But Bibi's popularity has waned. And so I'm thinking, I've been looking at the polls and this kind of thing, and normally there's some give here and there, and there's lots of people that oppose Bibi, and then when the election happens, it's closer than the polls suggested. But right now, something has changed in Israeli politics, and that is Bennett. So Naftali Bennett is a right-wing politician, sort of far right. He's right of Likud, so he's farther than the center right, but a pretty sensible right-wing politician, and you know, still a little bit extreme for some people, but someone respected on the right. He served as prime minister because he made a deal with the left-wing parties to form a coalition. Now, I talked about this back when this was Inside Israel News, back in 2021 when that happened. I told you guys that it could happen. Like, I was one of the first people. I came out and made an episode saying, there's the way the polls are looking, there's a mathematical possibility where Naftali Bennett's party could be the last puzzle piece to forming an anti-Bibi coalition. And if that's the case, he could demand to be prime minister. So I was like, there's a scenario where he could become prime minister. And 2 weeks later, other news sources started to pick up, you know what? Naftali Bennett could end up as prime minister. But listeners here already knew that 2 weeks ahead of time. So anyway, he served as prime minister. For a lot of people on the far right, they saw that as a betrayal. They saw that as him turning against the right. And so at the end of that term, when that government fell apart after about a year, he was in what's called rotating prime minister with Yair Lapid of the Yesh Atid party. He's a former journalist. He's the center-left leader in Israel. And, so they were eventually going to switch out. But when the government fell apart, Bennett left office as prime minister, and Lapid became acting prime minister until the election. And when the election happened, Bibi won. Ultimately, Bibi was able to form a government. So he got back into office. But for this period of time, Naftali Bennett was prime minister, but he was leader of a very unwieldy coalition. I mean, this was a coalition that had far left parties in it, far right parties in it. It was a mess. There were 8 political parties from broadly different portions of the political spectrum. Pros. The positive of it was that it was much more collegial. The leaders got along, they worked together. You had the brain trust of several very experienced and intelligent leaders. Cons. When you have Meretz, the Vigor party, the far left party that's all concerned about LGBTQ and transgender rights and all this kind of thing, in the same coalition with Naftali Bennett's, with his political party, Yamin, the right, right politically and correct, like in English, right also means correct in Hebrew. So he had his party out there. And so, I mean, how are you going to balance that out? So they didn't agree on much. What they did agree on, they were able to get done. And they managed to get Isaac Herzog, whose father was president. They managed to get him elected president. So, they got Bougie. Everyone in Israel everyone has a nickname. Nobody is Benjamin or Isaac. They're Bougie, or they're Bibi, or they're, Izzy or Yossi, or, everybody's got a nickname. It's great. So you just, very few names where people actually call by that, especially with biblical names. Everyone's got a biblical name. So anyway, all right. So Bennett's jumped in, and the Knesset has 120 seats, right? And he's polling, depending on which poll you look at, between 24 and 27 seats, because he's registered his new party, which is just called Bennett Party. He hasn't come up with a name for it yet. He's come back into the fore. He's been very critical of Bibi, probably wouldn't join a government with him, says that Bibi should quit. He's been raising concerns about Qatari payments to purportedly to high-ranking members of the government. He's been complaining about Bibi's handling of the war and the negotiations and all this kind of thing. He's resonating with a lot of people right now. Now, When people jump into the political fray, it's normal for them to have a bump in the polls. So if he were polling at 10 or 12 seats, I would just say, oh, look, he's just the thing of the moment. He's the fad. And when the election actually happens, he might get 6 or 7 seats, maybe 5, something down there. Okay. But we've seen this phenomenon before, where people have big showing like this and it disappears. But at 26, 27 seats, that's a lot of seats. My friends, that's almost a quarter of the Knesset. It seems that a lot of people have latched onto him as someone who could lead the country forward, who would be right enough to be a trustworthy and safe leader for the country, not to sell Israel out on security and that kind of thing, but who is opposed to Bibi, right? I mean, we've heard this thing in America, like there are all these people, well, if we could have Trump's policies without Trump. Yeah, there are people who think like that. Not many, but there are. Well, the same thing in Israel. Could we have policies like Bibi's without Bibi? He might be able to achieve that. It just depends. So at this point, if you consider his political party an opposition party, then together with parties like Benny Gantz's party, the National Party, and Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid's party, and other political parties, the opposition is somewhere between like 65 and 72 seats. Right? It's big. The polls are definitely leaning against Bibi. Now, I've always said there's a caveat. You take it with a grain of salt because polls tend to lean left in Israel, and when people actually turn out to vote, it could be more balanced. But Bibi, the parties in the coalition that Bibi leads now are polling about 49, 50 seats. Obviously, you need 61 to form a government, so they're falling quite a bit below that. However, Naftali Bennett is offering an alternative. He was, deeply unpopular just a few years ago, but the circumstances have changed now. It's entirely possible he could come back leading a new coalition. And with him, because he's not Bibi Netanyahu, yes, he's very right and more right of center than others, but he could get Benny Gantz, former Air Force General Benny Gantz, into the coalition. He could get former journalist Yair Lapid into the coalition and form a more centrist coalition. But he could also work with Likud. If Bibi left Likud and Likud wanted to join the coalition, he could work with them too. He's able to pull the major parties together and form something like a unity government. And once again, we'd have the brain trust. We'd have General Benny Gantz. We'd have Yair Lapid, who made a great foreign minister. He's a very good diplomat. He's affable. He's likable. He's charismatic. He's good on TV. And he's great for meeting with foreign leaders. He met with the Saudis. He met with Arab leaders. People liked him. He did a good job in his time. He followed up diplomatically on the what we call the Abraham Accords. Like he made that do something during his time as foreign minister before he became acting prime minister and then opposition leader once again. So there are all these people that can work together, right? And if they had a coalition that wasn't so unwieldy, far right and far left parties, that could be. And so if I were Bibi, I would look at that and say there are two ways this can go. Bibi should have done his succession planning already, but he should look to someone to lead Likud after him. He should make it clear that he's not seeking re-election, and he should make a plan to leave. And I think he could pitch that idea I just said. Give him immunity, pardon him in exchange for him just going quietly. He's already Israel's longest-serving prime minister. He has served as prime minister longer than David Ben-Gurion, the founding prime minister. He served for a good long time, but Bibi has served longer. And he did 3.5 years as prime minister back in the 90s. Then in 2009, he was elected. Since 2009, with the exception of the year and a half or so of the change bloc, which was Bennett and Lapid's coalition, with the exception of that year and a half, Bibi has been the prime minister of Israel since 2009, right? Just a little hiatus between 2021 and 2022 before he came back into office. And then, of course, we had October 7th and all this kind of nonsense. Now, I, for one, like collegial governments. I don't necessarily prefer particular leaders. Obviously, I voted for Trump, and I like that kind of leadership. We need that kind of leadership now in America. Israel has had that kind of leadership, but I would really prefer it go in a more collegial direction. You have several leaders working together, because one person, with a bunch of yes men around him, unfortunately, that's how Bibi operates. And it's worked in some ways. And I think it's done all it can do for Israel. The 12-day war is going to be Bibi's crowning success, defeating Iran and watching that situation. So we will see what happens, but those are the polls. So, listener John, I hope I've talked a little bit about the lawfare and where that stands, and of course some of the politics in Israel, which I love to talk about. I started this podcast to talk about Israeli politics, so that I wouldn't have to repeat myself a dozen times to all my friends who are like, Isaac, what's going on? I did a stint, a volunteer. I had a volunteer position with the State Control Committee in the Knesset. So I know, I've been there. I've been in the Israeli government and I've seen some of it works. I've commented on constitutional reforms there and helped them, write letters to different institutions, international institutions and what. So I have a feeling for how things work there. And I'm able to bring those insights to you guys. So what will happen? It's not clear. Could something happen that makes Bibi more popular? Possibly. The way the war has gone, though, has been a little bit of this and a little bit of that, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So I just don't see Bibi being able to run on a big victory in the war. However, if he's somehow able to destroy Hamas and create a more peaceful situation, maybe the Saudis are on the verge of normalization. They just want Hamas destroyed. Right. And they want to form a kind of a coalition with Israel and other governments against Iran. Right. That would be a huge thing. If notorious MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the king there, if he were able to accomplish that, that would be good for his kingdom, and it would justify making peace with a former enemy. So there you go. We've covered the latest polls. Talked about where things are going. We will see. Will Bennett peter out in the next year and a half? Will there be early elections? There are lots of questions here. I just don't see that happening while there's still a crisis. That's just not how Israelis do business. However, with Bibi's growing unpopularity, who knows? But we will see. In any event, that's the Israeli news. So let's jump over to the international news. I'll try to be quick about that and go from there. All right, my friends, on to international stuff. So this is the one, like I told you guys before, the one area where I disagree with Trump. And I have to back up a little bit. I've had some debates on X, and some of those have gotten interesting. Had a couple of really good ones lately. So I've had to explain the position. So, my friends, recently we had August 14th, right? August 14th, 2025 is a very important day that just kind of came and went. Nobody thought about it. But on that day, we celebrated 80 years of peace. 80 years of no major warfare between the major powers in the world. And that 80-year peace came from, one, dominance of the United States, and two, the bomb, right? As a result of that, Stalin didn't attack directly. There was the minor war in Korea. Vietnam, these proxy wars, yeah, those were terrible wars and conflicts that have happened around the world, but they were not a Soviet invasion of Europe. Nothing like World War II and World War I. Full-scale, total war, wars of attrition and this kind of thing, right? All of that was a thing of the past until 2022, where we started to see hints that kind of thing could come back. But as of August 14th, 2025, for 80 years, the United States and the bomb have kept the peace, right? And that international order is the thing that has made the world more prosperous, that has brought, food security, so many things, right? The world is so much better place because of dominance of the United States. And now we have this little four-pack of Axis powers, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, who want to upend that. Their goal, the four of them working together, they have no interests in common. Like the Russians, the Chinese really should be enemies. North Korea is, out there. They're a loose cannon to all this. And Iran wants to dominate the Middle East. That's not necessarily a good thing for Russia. But they all have one thing in common that makes them bosom buddies. They hate the US. They want to destroy US power in the world. My friend, as a patriot, and as somebody who enjoys peace and prosperity and, all you need is love. My good friend Jake Jacobs, also over on the Nation podcast, One Nation podcast, Jake is always, talking about peace. And like, peace is good, but we also need justice. All right. As I've said many times before, I think the best way to go about this is to defeat Russia right now. Give Ukraine what they need. There's $300 billion in frozen assets out there that Russian assets being held in the West. We could borrow against that and let Ukraine have another 100 million. The 100 billion, excuse me, 100 billion, the $105 billion in mostly aid, military aid to Ukraine. And when I say mostly, these were old weapon systems we gave Ukraine, weapon systems that would cost us more money to dispose of than they cost to ship to Ukraine. Right? They did us a favor. They disposed of old ammunition, old weapon systems, and it has also helped us build up our supply lines, our supply chains for new weapons by building more to replace those weapons. Anyway, sending all that stuff over there, 105 billion of it has turned Russia into a third-rate power. Right? They on paper, they looked like a much more formidable military force in 2022 until they invaded Ukraine. Now, Russia is headed toward global South status. I don't like that term, but they're becoming a third world country, to borrow an older term. I like to call it the developing world. That may just be a little too optimistic. Anyway, Russia is crumbling, and I say we let them crumble. I mean, like, they need to be defeated. If they are defeated in Ukraine, completely driven out, they will never threaten the West again. It's over. They're already agitating against the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. Those countries are in NATO. That's Article 5. If Russia moves in on one of those countries, we are obligated to go to war to defend them. This is dangerous. I have sons approaching military age. Some of them want to join the service, various branches of the military. And, I want them to serve in peacetime, just as I did 20 years ago. Not that I'm that old. Anyway, they need to serve in peacetime, right? And I don't want to see them have to go to war. As I was just telling somebody the other day on X, I mean, my grandfather fought at Okinawa, and that really caused him a lot of pain and suffering and PTSD for the rest of his life. And it made life difficult for the whole family. We're just recovering from it now. So I don't want any of my 7 children to have to go and fight. All right, so we could give Ukraine more weapons. We could go after the Shadow Fleet. Russia's selling oil with these ships that they turn the transponders off, or I call them the Shadow Fleet. They kind of try to go pass invisibly around the world and ship oil to China, India, other places. China has spent like $265 billion buying oil from Russia. It's dropping off a little bit because of the Chinese economic situation, but they're still buying a lot of it. India has bought a lot of it. But these ships are, an environmental hazard. They're sinking and leaking oil. We could go after them. Get the G7 together and Japan, which would be the major, and Australia. Actually, I think Japan's in the G7. Anyway, get the maritime powers of the world together, the G7 plus one, and sign a treaty authorizing the capture of these ships, seizure on the high seas, call it environmental piracy, something like that, because these are dangerous to the world's oceans, and go after these ships, right, in a serious way. You do those two things, and Vladimir Putin will not be able to continue this war, right? And Trump's already doing the third thing I would recommend, and he's already putting tariffs on countries like India for buying oil from Russia. He's, this making a threat to show Putin that he's serious. So he meets with Putin in Alaska. Interesting place to meet. Alaska used to be part of Russia. We bought it from them, Seward's Folly in 1867. Turned out to be, far from being Seward's Folly, turned out to be a really good deal. There's a lot of resources up there, a lot of oil and minerals and such. So it was a really good deal for the U.S., bad deal for Russia. And they haven't forgotten that. A lot of Russians want Alaska back, right? Anyway, so Trump meets with Putin. They have a press conference, and it's a big nothing burger. He doesn't have a deal yet. They canceled the lunch they were supposed to have together, and Trump went back to Washington, D.C. right away. He's giving a meeting with Zelensky. In fact, the Zelensky's in Washington as I'm recording this. So my next episode, I'll be able to analyze what what the results of that were. European leaders are coming as well to speak. They're very concerned for their security. And the talk is Putin wants the Donbass, territory he can't conquer, the full Donbass, the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, districts, and the full region that is the Donbass, most of which is a heavily fortified area for Ukraine. The Ukraine has been fighting there. And he wants that given up in exchange for peace. That's what he's saying. Whether or not Trump has agreed to that is not clear. The goal with that kind of thing, though, these kinds of maneuvers, is that what Putin wants here is for Zelensky to say no. And then Zelensky is the impediment to peace. No, so if you're out there saying that, and we've got lots of people out there, shouting that Russian talking point, that's you're playing right into Putin's hands. That's how he does these things. He makes demands he knows that can't be met, and then he uses it to blame. So now the war will go on, and it'll be Zelensky's fault, right? And that creates more problems for Zelensky and makes it easier for Russia to try to conquer them. Russia has already lost 1 million men fighting in this war. Putin is not going to stop until he has to. So I'm very disappointed with the way things look. If there was a ceasefire tomorrow, 20% of Ukraine is occupied, and that would not be acceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable. In the interests of peace, just to stop the war, that could be swallowed, I suppose, if we had to. We've had armistice lines like that before. Israel put up with armistice lines. North and South Korea are still an armistice line, right? We've had stuff like that before. It's not been good. But it's better than war. Okay, we'll have peace. But at what price, right? Giving Putin territory that he could not conquer, that's not compromise. That's appeasement. Right, giving him the Donbass, that would be, Lord Chamberlain style appeasement. And Putin would take that as a sign that he can get more. What's more, Xi Jinping would see that and say, hey, if the US will give them this territory, then if I can get Taiwan, and I've talked about this before in previous episodes, if he can take Taiwan, we might let him keep it. That's what Xi Jinping is thinking. Now, that said, Trump is probably the only president who could pull this off. There is a scenario here where Trump gets a peace deal and Russia, is not rewarded, right? It would have to be just on the ceasefire line, no further territorial concessions. And it would have to be understood that Ukraine does not recognize that, and that we still recognize the 1992 borders, but we're willing to leave Russia in control of part of it in the interests of stopping the killing. That's how it would have to be portrayed. Legally speaking, Ukraine cannot cede territory. It's in their constitution. So they could stop fighting and accept that a foreign power has invaded part of their country they could not recognize. And we're hearing that there may be security guarantees. Marco Rubio is saying that, so I'm willing to trust that. But we're talking about like Article 5 style security guarantees. Keir Starmer and the Brits are already talking about putting troops on the ground if the fighting stops. That wouldn't do a lot, but at least the presence of NATO forces in Ukraine would prove a potential deterrent. I mean, that again assumes that Putin is sane. He wants to conquer Ukraine, and he's going to start moving in on the Baltic states. So my main thing here is I want this war to end. I want it to end with a Ukrainian victory. If that's not possible, and it is, there is a scenario here where Ukraine just wins, then I could accept the ceasefire along the battlefront, the battle lines where they are drawn now, on a temporary basis, understanding that if we're being realists and saying that peace is a higher priority, establishing a peaceful situation is more important than Ukrainian victory, which I don't believe it is, but let's just take that principle for the moment. If that is the case, then we could just stop the war and call that an end, right? And Ukraine could have its security guarantees. European troops could move into Ukraine. Europeans will be responsible for making sure Ukraine is armed, and they're raising their defense budgets so that they'll be able to contest situations with Russia again in the future. I just don't want there to be another war. it has to be a long-term peace. If we're going to go into Kissinger and his strategies, creating a peaceful situation for a long term can resolve problems. Now, with Trump in office, it's possible, if we make the shift to China at that point, the pivot to China, pivot to the Pacific, that we could keep the peace. I don't know how J.D. Vance would work, because he's already made it clear that he's more interested in just U.S. interests here in the Americas. They might think that they can get away with trying again. I don't know. I've been disappointed with some of Vance's international positions. That said, overall, he'd still be a better president than any Democrat. I'm just hoping that he will change my mind. That he'll be able to prove himself a better leader than that. But I've told you, my friends, I'm not going to come here and blow smoke at you. Okay, I'm not here to be MAGA. I'm not here to be woke. I'm not here to play these games. I will tell you what I think and give you my analysis. Oftentimes proves right, and you take it for what you want. You can agree with me, disagree with me, think I'm nuts. That's up to you. But from the feedback I get from a lot of you guys, you are thinking about things, and whether you agree or disagree. I really like the emails I've gotten and the messages, and you guys telling me what you're thinking. Inside Israel News at Gmail, IK at Mensch-Kight Geopolitics, MK, mkgeopolitics.com. That's going to be the new website soon. mkgeopolitics.com, IK at mkgeopolitics.com. Blah, 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 blah. Man, that's a mouthful. If you email one of those, you can reach me, and I will try to read everything. I got a lot of you guys and a lot of messages. I'm trying to catch up. I really am. I do want to read them all because it's important to me. I really like your feedback. I really like your thoughts. You guys drive this show. This show is about you. The highest IQ, the most erudite, the most intelligent people on the planet. And it's an honor to make the show, and I want to know what you guys want to hear. And I'm trying. You can hear me talking about these things. So let's see what happens. I voted for Trump because I wanted strength restored. I do not like the way he's handled Ukraine. It's the one issue I disagree with Trump on. And I think his approach has been infantile and ridiculous right from the beginning. But for all that, I'd like to have some faith that he knows what he's doing. If this war ends, Russia's economy will probably just collapse, because at this point they're in a war footing. Their central bank is at its limits. Their oil infrastructure has been heavily damaged. The Europeans are already buying gas from everyone else in the world, including the United States. That's a win-win for everybody, right? Hardworking Americans will produce the gas and liquefy it, and we'll ship it across the oceans and sell it to the Europeans. It's beautiful, my friends. Drill, baby, drill. That's good news for working Americans, but still. So I just don't see that Russia's economy will be able to recover in the long run. Their nuclear missiles are already rotting. They test new missiles, and the new missiles blow up. They test the old missiles, and the old missiles blow up. We know they're not making enough tritium to supply the boosters and neutron generators for their weapons. So, technical stuff. The tritium, it's got a half-life of 9 to 12 years, and it becomes helium-3, and then you don't. It's useless because it absorbs neutrons. When you want a reaction, you want to be shooting neutrons all over the place. Anyway, they're not making enough tritium. They are not keeping their weapons. Their nuclear arsenal is mostly a bluff at this point. They'd be weaker than Hiroshima if they were fired, probably. Some of them. Unfortunately, you can get, between 50 and 100K from a fission reaction. But if you want a thermonuclear device, you want, 300 kilotons. If you want 500 kilotons, you want a megaton. You need tritium, and you need deuterium, and you need lithium. You need your secondary and tertiary reactions. Tertiary, I'm referring to Sarbamba. It was a 50 megaton bomb, and it had a 3-stage. Right, there was a primary, a secondary. Anyway, you guys have heard me talk about nuclear weapons before. Maybe I should do a whole bonus episode on where things stand, because we're in this nuclear age now where there's more than it used to be. Just the two, right? It was the U.S. against the Soviet Union. China switched sides kind of short term after they became a nuclear power. So there was but we're in a world with more than one major nuclear power at this point, and you know, that's a different thing. So that might be worth talking about. Okay, China. The China's economy continues to suffer. China Update, great podcast out there, show on YouTube as well. Talking about different things going on in the Chinese economy. They're trying to pump money into the economy. They're trying to do everything they can to prop up their economy. It's not good. It's very fragile. And Trump knows that, and he's using it as leverage for negotiations. They keep getting 90-day stays, on the tariffs. But the deal we have in place, where 30% on Chinese tariffs, 10% tariff on 30% tariff on Chinese goods coming to the U.S., 10% tariff on U.S. goods going to China, and then buying more of our stuff. That's not a bad deal for Americans. And we're getting there, right? So this up, but also companies, as Sal Macagliano has been noting, companies don't want to ship electric cars anymore because they keep catching fire. And aboard ship, these kinds of fires that burn very hot, these batteries, they burn very, very hot, and they're difficult to control. And when you get a ship full of cars, full of electric cars in particular, like one battery goes off, a bunch of them would go off, the whole ship could go down. It's just too risky. And there have been deaths from fires at sea as a result of these electric cars. So the electric car trade may be in trouble. And that's bad news for BYD. That's bad news for China. Anyway, they got lots of problems going on there. Meanwhile, they've had a collision in the Pacific, out in the South China Sea. It's dumb. Sal Macagliano's covered this, and I really think you go look at him for the details. But they're chasing this Philippine Coast Guard ship in territory that is internationally recognized. The shoals there are internationally recognized as Philippine territory, but the Chinese claim it, and they're out there blasting high pressure water at this Filipino ship and chasing them down. And this ship is maneuvering rapidly to avoid them. And there's a warship of the People's Liberation Army Navy, the Plan, that's the Chinese Navy, and their Coast Guard, right? A smaller ship from their Coast Guard. And they're weaving and wending back and forth. And then the Chinese Coast Guard ship cuts across the bow of the warship that's pursuing this Philippine vessel, and the warship collides with the Coast Guard vessel. There's some loss of life involved, and terrible incident. Wouldn't happen if China wasn't out playing games in the ocean. They're trying to treat the oceans like land territory, like you can just put an island in the middle of the South China Sea, or shoals off the coast of the Philippines, and it's yours now. And everything that happens there happens under your control. That's not how maritime power works, my friends. Anyway, so this is really, really bad. China needs to be contained. This stuff needs to stop. And a U.S. warship went out there, sailed around for a little while, and went back to the Philippines. And then the Chinese are like, well, we ran off an American warship. My backside, my friends, my tuchus. that American destroyer is worth half the Chinese Navy. It went out there, it looked around, and it came back. That was its mission, was just to go out and show the flag. And the Chinese were nowhere near it. They don't want to mix it up with an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Go Navy. Ryan Macbeth calls it Department of the Boat People. We are the Department of the Boat People, and I will tell you, as a Navy guy myself, you don't want to mess with the U.S. Navy. Anyway, so that's a terrible incident there, and China, we need to be able to shift our focus to China and really deter them. So with that, I'm going to shift gears here and talk about one last thing, the elections in Bolivia. So the last thing I want to talk about here, Bolivia and this kind of thing, first of all, kind of comes from the Milei effect, I like to call it, from Argentina, where this was a country that was fairly prosperous in the 1940s until Perón came to power, and it's had this socialism and all this nonsense since then, underperforming, poor country with all this potential, but unable to do it. They have every kind of financial crisis. They've had, periods of time where 3 or 4 presidents will resign in quick succession, and it's been a mess there. So, in any case, Milei's election, convincing young people to vote for a free marketeer, has been brilliant. And what has resulted? They've, almost balanced the budget. Inflation is down. The cost of living is down. Jobs are up. Argentina is recovering. They're becoming a country that might actually have some prosperity going forward. So go Javier Milei. He actually has this whole agenda for his second term, which would be awesome. But he's had quite some results from his first. More tax reforms, maybe a flat tax, reduce regulations even further, and working to grow the economy, labor reforms, that kind of stuff. Good stuff, right? Well, that's starting to wear off to Bolivia. Bolivia's had leftist leaders forever. And, finally, they have a shift going on to the right. Now, I have to note, in Central and South America, China and the cartels, and they've been going around whacking center-right candidates. Mexico, 37 candidates were killed on the center-right. That's not an accident. There are powers that be that want Central and South America to lean toward America's enemies. This is what got us into the First World War. This is dangerous stuff, my friends. Was Germany trying to act in the Americas in our sphere of influence? Well, in Bolivia, they have not only one but two center-right, capitalist candidates for president who have run who are going into the runoff, and those are Rodrigo Paz Pereira and Jorge Tuto Quiroga. This is interesting. These guys, fascinating. Pereira is, he's a senator. He's the former mayor of Tarija, and he's kind of a centrist. He's positioned himself sort of as a moderate alternative to the right-wing opposition. He's the son of a former president, Paz Zamora, and he's kind of moderate, but he's generally more free market, more center-right, not somebody who's a hard left socialist, this kind of thing, right? Not the best option, but okay. And then we've got the 65-year-old former president and vice president under the dictator Hugo Banzar in the 1990s. Quiroga is a U.S.-educated right-winger with a long political career. Right? And he served briefly as president after Banzar's resignation due to cancer. He's run for president many times, and he keeps losing to Evo Morales. Well, finally, Morales is not on the ballot. What is it, the first time in 20 years or something? Oh, my God. Basically, the perennial curse of Bolivia. Anyway, so Quiroga is somebody who's seen as a radical and more, capitalist and right-wing. So go Bolivia. Viva Bolivia. Viva Libertad. I'm not going to finish that. There's a new phrase that Milei has out there, and he basically says, long live liberty, damn it. It's like, anyway. But yes, good stuff. So I just wanted to end on that high note. It's a positive thing. Well, I'll be back in the next episode to analyze what happens with Ukraine, more analysis on Israeli politics, and some thoughts on American politics as well, as always, for my esteemed listeners. You guys, my Mensch, my insiders, you are the best. So please reach out by email. InsideIsraelNews@gmail.com is still available. ik@mkgeopolitics.com is also available if you want to email me there. Social media, InsideIsrael.news is still available for you to go to for the time being, and reach out. Right. I'm going to continue with the outro music, October Rain. I think that Aidan Golani's song is very apt. Until the last hostage is released, I'm going to continue to play that. And, when that happens, we'll see if I want to do a different outro. So with that, I will say, as always, goodbye, lihitrot, itekimasu, shus, bistan, ciao.
Writers of the history, stand with me. Look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told fantasy, ecstasy. Everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why the time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain.